The problem right now is that corporations introduce AI widely in the workplace. They don't know what they're doing. And they've already realized that they have to do bring your own device. And that the bring your own device revolution started with smartphones like this. Companies were too slow to order smartphones for people because people went and buy the best fucking smartphones on the market for themselves. And then the bosses give up and say, buy your own smartphone. We'll pay the bill every month, but buy the smartphone you're comfortable with. The same is happening with AI. People are picking up different forms of AI they're comfortable with. The problem is to use the same AI privately and have therapy sessions at home at night with the same AI to bring to work the next day.
Today's guest is a Swedish musician, producer, philosopher, and cultural provocateur. His career spans decades, but his crowning achievements must certainly be his multiple works with co-author Jan Söderqvist, including titles like The Netocrats, Digital Libido, Syntheism, and my favorite, Process and Event. Along the way, he's figured out how to suck the juice out of life. Alexander Bard, welcome.
Thank you so much, Max, for having me.
You're most welcome. You know, I want to tell you, I had a really hard time thinking about what I want to talk with you about because there's so much we can cover. I mean, we've already done this sort of stuff together before, and we've gone on for hours. So I'm going to try it the old-fashioned way, which is to start off with a question. If we go in a series of questions, so be it. If we drift, so be it.
We should also tell the people watching this conversation that people were reading Alexander Bard and Jan Söderqvist and Max Borders in parallel long before we even met. So we had the overlap already from the very beginning, and our philosophies in this sense are very complementary.
Certainly. And that's one of the other difficult things about trying to formulate how I would want to do an interview with you, how I would want to have a conversation with you, knowing that other people are watching, that I would facilitate. I've derived so many great influences from you, especially over the last 5 years or so. Let's start with one of those, because I think what's really impressive is that I guess it's been more than a quarter century ago now, you predicted the rise of an information controlling elite. Okay? Turns out you were right. That seems to be today something we can all acknowledge. Can you explain the transition from capitalism, as it were, to the current era, to what constitutes the current era?
Okay, so the way we have to redefine and re-understand the period we call capitalism or industrialism, if you want to, is that we have to understand it as a form of communication. So I agree with Marshall McLuhan that the media is the message in a fundamental sense. So the way we human beings communicate will define what kind of age we live in. And if you look at world history that way, we discover that we have 5 paradigms that we deal with. And obviously the first one is what separates human beings from animals. Well, it's just language. It's just plain spoken language. And spoken language has only existed for about 250,000 years or so. And it's a specific hominid, Homo sapiens, that was really good at it too. We were smaller with smaller brains than the competitors, but we had a better language. And we had more social skills because of that language. So written language spoken language is fundamental to being human. We can't talk to a dog, but we can talk to other humans. Then the second paradigm in that case would be written language, and that was developed quite recently, like some 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, whatever. The different steps in that evolution as well. But we've only had the kind of alphabet we have today currently in the English language for the last 3,000 years. So this period of written language has not affected us genetically at all. We are still the same nomads we were before written language, but it was the fundament for civilization as we know it, for settlements eventually, for semi-nomadism before that, and then eventually permanent settlements, and the kind of cultures we have today with countries and empires and nations and cities and everything. And we went, because of written language, we went from 3 million people on the entire planet to 8 billion today. That's all due to the fact that we started writing. So whoever was in charge of writing or controlled the process of writing control what we today call the feudalist society. And in the same way, the printing press, it was first developed in China, but it was basically locked up. If you lock up a technology and you don't use it, you're not going to have much advantage of it, would you? So the lesson learned is that the Chinese developed the printing press and never really used it. They locked it up. Whereas in Europe, people were naive enough to start using it, and it changed the world forever. So from the 1450s forward, we have the printing press. And the printing press also printed money called paper money. It's one of the many innovations that came out of the printing press. And paper money, but by being abstract money, totally changed the world forever. And that's what we call this the capitalist age, but we should really call it the printing press age. And it started in the 1450s. It exploded by the 1700s. Eventually, a small part of the world, very provincial, marginal part called Europe, was developed, and Western Europe basically conquered the world. And this was all the way to 2 world wars in the 20th century. And by the time that happened, the main European colony, which was called North America, had become its own empire called the United States. The United States thankfully saved Europe from Hitler and Stalin. And eventually we have what we call the free world today, which is like Europe and North America and a few allies in the rest of the world like Japan and Australia. So this was all the 20th century, and it was the completion of the printing press. So in our theory, mass media is the printing press. That means that if you just put, an electric pulse to a printing press, you get radio, you get television, because they're structured in the same way as a printing press is. It's a top-down structure. There are a few guys out there who basically control the medium. And eventually developed something called parliamentary democracy, which we were kind of supposed to be happy about because you and I were supposed to be democratic citizens. We were only really allowed to vote every 4 years and put name in a box of somebody we didn't trust anyway. And that was it.
When
And
they
we're supposed to
printed
be
us a
happy.
ballot, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly why the internet upsets exactly the very people who called themselves Democrats back then, because the internet means that I actually speak my mind all the time, every day. We live in a sociocracy already. We're just not aware of it yet. We live in a world where the internet and AI is registering all our behaviors, and we speak through our behaviors. It's the most honest thing we could possibly do. And I actually vote with my body through body movements every second. If you want to measure it with cameras and microphones, you may. And this is the sociocracy we're moving into right now, and it's going to make all the old institutions that were built on the printing press, which is the universities of the world, will implode. Politics, we know it, will implode. Academia, so know it will go away. And of course, mass media will all implode. And the internet will kill all these things. And now when we're adding this intelligence layer to the internet called AI, on top of everything else that the internet is, we're basically creating something that can only really be described theologically, to be honest. One of our books, the Synthesis book, deals with this, that we're creating God in the internet age, and we don't really know what we're doing, but that's exactly what we're doing right now. And theology is probably the only place you can go to try to understand what's going on in the world. And this is a massive paradigm shift. And that's exactly why America's voted for a clown as president. That's what you do when the system falls apart. Because the only honest guy in the room is the clown. So we wrote a book called The Netocrats 25 years ago, John and I. In chapter 6 of Netocrats, we wrote that America, the biggest empire on the planet, will soon pick a reality TV show star as president just because people will understand that politics is gone completely ironic. We're living in an age where politics cannot create any value at all. All the new value created comes through technology. All politics can do is destroy value, and that's why it's dangerous. And of course, in this process of working through the 6 books I've written with John, I eventually encountered the very people around the world who think in a similar pattern, often independently of me and John, and you were one of them. And that's why I love your books. I highly recommend Max's books to anybody who follows me. And we have independently of each other come to the same conclusions. And I think what Borders and Bard and Sedicus are doing is basically telling people, okay, so these are the things that are timeless. For example, this urge towards freedom and liberty and self-expression are timeless. And I don't want to compromise on any of those things, and neither do you. We're freedom lovers. You can call them libertarians or classic liberals, whatever you want. We don't care. Those are just ideological boxes you try to make. I'm just basically looking for as much freedom as I possibly can. And for me to make money is only to get a resource that can give me more freedom. That's a look at the world. I think we're aligned in that. And we're then trying to find in what way has the struggle for freedom and liberty for individual human beings, how has that struggle always existed? And how would it express itself in a digital age, which is so radically different from the industrial age that we're leaving behind?
Forgive this brief interruption, but I suspect you're here because you're disillusioned with legacy politics. If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating. You know, it occurs to me the parallels in our thinking and work, particularly, I mean, if you think of maximizing freedom in various ways, or having that be our directional North Star, knowing we'll never actually get there. It's I've called it elsewhere asymptotic anarchism, right? It's like, how free can I be moving in that direction without ever being able to get there, because I'm going to encounter power in some form or fashion. But one of the things that, functionally speaking, you and I tend to have sort of coalesced around is this idea of decentralization.
Aren't we, like both you and I, looking for any trace of decentralization, and we support it?
Yes, yes.
Because, I mean, we wrote The Netocrats in the year 2000. And 3 years later, my friend Rick Falkenge founded the first pirate party here in Sweden, where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And then came the pirate movement, which I think was prophetic. There are still pirate parties in Europe doing okay, but it wasn't meant to be a political party, anything like that. It was just the first statement that came out of the digital age. Like, oh, we got the internet now. We got laptops and smartphones now. We want to express ourselves freely and enjoy the liberty of being online. And we don't want anybody to try to control the internet world, which could easily happen if you get all the wrong technologies. It could also be too late. It could just be that suddenly there's the technology there, which, for example, China is developing at the moment, basically controlling people through the internet, creating a surveillance state, which is an ultimate nightmare for guys like you and me. And this is a struggle. It's a clear struggle to keep the online world free and open. And the vast majority of people we've been asked about will say that, yes, I want my internet to be free and open. I want to raise my kids in a free and open world where they have access to free and open technologies. So anybody out there, like when crypto came along and Bitcoin came along, anybody out there who jumps on board with the decentralization and try to develop technologies or ideologies, for that matter, that promote decentralization, you know, we jump on board. We've also met through Prospera, this wonderful community outside Honduras on an island called Roatan, which is basically, it, in a cynical way, could describe it as trying to create a Dubai or a Singapore for Central America, which it very much needs, to be honest. But it's much more than that, right? But that community, the Prospera community, which started about 10 years ago, is another one of these projects that are decentralization. And whenever on the world map today, I see a project that actively promotes the idea of decentralization, I'm totally for it. Because I think the other force out there, which is the force towards centralization, which is what the good old politicians are trying to do with us today, have to be fought. It's an active struggle we have to commit to.
In one sense, we have two parallel phenomena happening by virtue of this medium as the message. And you can think of it as two different sets of media, broadly speaking. One is a medium of decentralization, and one is a medium of centralization. You mentioned China. They have the social credit system and probably really soon a central bank digital currency, if they don't already use that. Certainly the BRICS nations are coalescing around that as an alternative to the dollar-denominated system. So I'm concerned about technologies that centralize and technologies, and of course I approve of and want to support technologies that decentralize. I am becoming less and less sanguine by the day that those latter technologies are going to be adopted and hold sway. It seems like we are quick, for example, in the communications media and the social media, for example, to people quickly turned to Elon Musk, who is in many ways, he's a builder. He's not a priestly sort. He's a geek.
Exactly.
He's an
We call
author.
him first generation netocrat. He's like the first capitalist. He's one of those guys, ruthlessly just exploiting the system
Yeah, and
for his
he's
own gain, right? That's what he does. Now, he's good because he's fighting the old establishment in a lot of different ways. And I prefer Elon over the alternatives. And to be honest about it, at least I had a conversation with the Stanford professor today, separate conversation. And I said, at least America, I don't know what was planned or not, but at least America is an oligopoly. And it's an oligopoly in the sense there are 7 now huge clouds with AI in America, whereas China just has one. It pretends it has several, but it doesn't. If you work in China, and I have worked in Shanghai, you work in China, you know that every damn data ever created, every 0 and 1 you ever have around you, will go straight to the Communist Party central computer. Now, America still doesn't have that. They tried, thanks to Edward Snowden and a few other heroes, decentralization heroes out there.
yeah.
That got stopped. So at least by now, the American oligopolies know, Google know, Apple know, they all know that if they try to centralize our data feeds for you and me too much, we'll just skip them and go to another one. And the fact that I can use several different AIs and measure them against each other for different purposes too, is really helpful. Now, the problem here, the 2 problems involved, one of them is, the major problem I would say is the naivety. So if you ask anybody, do you want to be free? They say, yeah, I want to be free and I want my kids to be free. I don't want to be controlled. I mean, nobody in China has chosen decentralized system that China has. But the Chinese story is that the internet is an anarchy, and then the very natural human dialectical response to anarchy is unfortunately tyranny. Because if you describe it, the only alternative we have to the anarchy is a tyranny, then people go for tyranny. Tyranny can be very popular if you come out of an age of chaos. If you came out of Germany in the 1920s and the Wall Street crash and how it ruined Germany and Germany went into hyperinflation, then you understand why a majority of Germans could even vote for Adolf Hitler. Because he just came through the door and said, I'm going to bring order to the chaos.
Right.
A
Right.
false fallacy, we call these guys, right? And they're popular because that's exactly what Xi Jinping is playing that card in China, saying, China could be chaos at any time. You could all get killed. You could all be anarchy. But I'm going to prevent that from happening by you giving me all the data, me processing all the data, the Communist Party controlling everything, and not allowing anybody to oppose themselves to the Communist Party doctrine. And me being the guy at the top, the dictator of the system, we can have order in China. And then he sells the story that this is the only possibility for China. This kind of hardcore Confucianism is the only alternative for
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
He's selling that message. We don't have to sell that.
Taoism
And
is
the great
gone.
thing that happened, which is good news in 2025, is that at least the clouds and the basic AI, the formative AI, the platform AI we're working with today, are at least 7 different competing clouds right now in America. And now we must stop these clouds from unifying into one big cloud. That's the most important thing we can do in America.
Well, and that's really, great thinking, because you're thinking also at the hardware level, which we need to certainly think about.
The problem is this for me. Things could easily go into anarchy, and we don't want anarchy. We're not anarchists. We don't want absolute decentralization.
Right.
We don't want 8 billion atoms on the planet that are terrified of each other.
Right.
We know historically what kind of bloodbaths that results in. We don't want that. We want the very difficult balancing between anarchy and tyranny in that case, which is called leadership and has a hierarchy and it's a civilized society. But where basically I can be free and open and I can at least move somewhere else. I've got the possibility to move somewhere else if I don't get what I want where I live. Now, if that's the world we want, if that is the heritage from the Enlightenment in America and Europe, we can fight for that. We can make that popular. The problem is this. I give an example of something I discussed with that Stanford professor today. The problem right now is that corporations introduce AI widely in the workplace. They don't know what they're doing. And they've already realized that they have to do bring your own device. And that the bring your own device revolution started with smartphones like this. Companies were too slow to order smartphones for people because people went and buy the best fucking smartphones on the market for themselves. And then the bosses give up and say, buy your own smartphone. We'll pay the bill every month, but buy the smartphone you're comfortable with. The same is happening with AI. People are picking up different forms of AI they're comfortable with. The problem is to use the same AI privately and have therapy sessions at home at night with the same AI they bring to work the next day.
Sure.
They're absolutely the problem right now, and this is the prophecy. We're in 2025. Nobody's talking about this yet. The prophecy I give you in the next 5 to 10 years is that when people discover that the AI they put inside their laptop takes all its information from their smartphone and from the laptop, including naked pictures of their children, and puts that into the AI system and throws it back out there. That's what an AI does if it's uncontrolled. That's exactly what's happening around the world right now. This is going to be such a mess and such a tragedy for so many people that a lot of people will be exposed to these kind of problems because they were naive about using the AI. A lot of these people who are naive about it are going to be so distraught by this that anybody walks through the door and says, I'm going to introduce order and tyranny through the system will be popular.
Yeah,
This is what I'm terrified of.
yeah.
I'm terrified of the fact that we're providing people with an excuse to love centralization.
Well, I think this polarity between freedom and order, it's been weighing on me a lot lately, in the sense that one of the things that we're going through right now in the United States, you in Europe as well, but it's different dynamic. It's a parallel dynamic, but it's different in the way it manifests. But right now we have the guy you call the clown, who is perceived as a strong man. And the reason he's perceived as a strong man is because he plays the role of one. He believes he's channeling or has become the avatar of something that we need, which is we seem to have needed, which is a pendulum swing away from too much decadence, permissiveness, disorderliness from the left. This is how the right wing perceives it. And so the pendulum has swung over toward the tyrannical, toward the excessive rage for order. And we don't know how far that's going to swing. And that can be scary when it swings too far, because you can get the Chinese situation. Which leads me to
You
sort of
probably won't, though,
this.
because you picked the medieval king. That's what you've done. It's like too much Harry Potter in America, apparently. And in this sense, Donald Trump is safer than a real strongman would be.
Of course, yeah, I
And I
agree.
think
I
Americans
agree
are
with
very
that.
aware of that. I
This
think
is
you're
why I
aware of the
think it's
fact that
absurd.
he's naive like an 11-year-old. You'd be terrified to actually pick a proper dictator to lead America.
I'm not
But it could
afraid
be
of
next.
Donald
It could be
Trump,
next.
the dictator, much less the king. This is
Yeah.
the perception. This is the perception of the people for whom he's an avatar, a positive avatar, and by those who have sort of fomented this wild hysteria or hyperventilation about him being a king or an autocrat. He's not. He can't be. He's dispositionally incapable of it, intellectually incapable of it. What I'm concerned about is that this movement back towards the call it the rage for order, the desire to have things be less disorderly, more orderly. It can instantiate or create institutions around which amber forms that are more authoritarian. And this has been happening. This paradoxically has been happening with the last administration. They were building a more totalitarian state of affairs in the Hannah Arendt sense of totalitarianism in terms of a surveillance state, a censorship regime, and so on, right? Where you cancel or you tell on your neighbor and this and that.
Well, it started already with Barack Obama. Barack Obama created more red tape bureaucracy for America than all the other presidents before him together.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what he did. He used the financial crisis in 2008 as an excuse to create all this massive amount of socialism in America. And the whole Trump thing was a reaction against Obama first, before Biden and the Biden years, which was a
correct.
continuation of the Obama years. So yes, Donald Trump is firmly anti-establishment, even if it represents another form of establishment. But That's always the case. If somebody's anti-establishment, they are representing another establishment, and he does that in America. That's true.
Well, and I won't go into the sort of perceived feminine versus masculine, the kind of feminization idea archetypally versus the masculinization. Freedom and order is perhaps the best way of thinking of the pendulum right now. I guess where I'm headed with it though um, is what it rarely lands on what I would conceive of as a healthy dialectic between freedom and order that I think you and I share. I think that the way that you and I look at it is good protocol design, good institutions, restricted nationalism, these kind of things are a dialectic between these unhealthy excesses.
Yeah, I think the excesses, in the sense that Kamala Harris was 1,000 times worse than Donald Trump, I
Mm,
think the excesses can be summarized in the ideological idea there's something wrong with you. And the ideologist, the politician, knows that, and he's better than you are.
yeah.
And therefore, he has the right to try to control you and change you into something you're not. This is a remnant from Protestantism that dominates America and Europe today on the left. It's called progressivism, but it's a myth and it's wrong. Because at the end of the day, citizens just want to be left to themselves and run their own affairs. And we basically want the government to be nothing but an insurance against violence and anarchy. And of course, if you are unlucky in life with certain things, general health insurance could be a good idea. You want a minimal political system. You want a small government. That's what you want. So you can have as much freedom and liberty as possible. And the government should only do what a government should do. But the problem is that the very people who made careers in politics full time were all schooled in the sort of social politics and ideology, and they were trying to think of themselves superior to you and me. Simply because of political candidates, they must be superior to you and me. And therefore, they took on these huge political agendas. I mean, I live in Sweden. I live with social democracy. All the 8 parties of the Swedish parliament are social democrats. All of them believe in some kind of progressivism and progressive politics and how they're going to change me as a citizen. And of course, I fight it back as hard as I can because I do not want to change another human being. Anyway, I don't want to change other human beings. I have that inclination. I think that's what we share. I do not want to change that human beings. If anybody's going to change, they can decide for themselves that they want to transform into something they're not. That's a personal journey you make. But I don't want to do that at all. I just want to have a civilized society where we're all left to our own devices as much as possible.
It,
And therefore, with Donald Trump, because he cannot change it, because he's a fucking joker. He's a fucking clown. He will not impose himself on you like, you have to be like me. The problem with Kamala Harris's of the world is that although she's obviously quite a failure herself with her own social life, who would trust a non-mother to become president of America? Why would the first female president of America be a non-mother? Already there, Kamala Harris was really
the
weird.
wine
A really weird
drinking
thing.
stepmom.
Yeah, America will never pick a non-mother as first female president.
And they
The
probably
family is that
shouldn't.
important to American society. It is that important. The congregation in church, the community, family. You build your entire society. We'll build our society around the trust in the government, which I think is unhealthy. But at least in America, you don't trust the government, but you trust family. You trust family. This kind of weird thing that why would she be superior to us and teach us in what way we would be different? And the whole woke agenda was this last desperate attempt at the progressivism that was dead and over. If we had had Michel Foucault around, when the woke guys came along and said they were Foucauldians, he would have killed them. There wasn't a single trace of Foucault in any of this bullshit that was going on. It was just really mentally weird.
When I look at Europe and Britain in particular, but also the continent, Scandinavia perhaps to the least degree, although you can tell me if I'm wrong, I see a lot of this having been instantiated and institutionalized to such a degree that it almost is irredeemable. Whether it's from the sort of cosmopolitan naivete around letting in all of the immigrants from the third world, most of whom happen to be Muslim and have values that are completely at odds with continental Europe and Britain, but also the institutionalization of social justice progressivism and good old-fashioned old school socialism. It doesn't seem to be letting up. And in fact, the the tip of the spear being the EU and the UK governments instituting this mass surveillance state, the censorship regime, you know, putting people in jail for, social media posts, trying to adjudicate every little thing that happens on the internet. That to me is it's one step into something that is really, really hard to reverse.
That could be the case, but the debate is very much alive in Europe, and it's for one simple reason: Russia. So the war between Russia and Ukraine has changed things forever. I completely sympathize with the Trump doctrine. I believe that if Germany is not willing to militarize and defend Ukraine against the Russians, why should the Americans care? I believe that if Japan doesn't want to remilitarize and defend Taiwan against China, then why would America care? I know that the part of the Trump doctrine is that America will care a lot about Cuba and Venezuela. And I said this all along, that Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, means America's going to go to war with Venezuela and Cuba, and I will again be right. I think Greenland, Panama, holiday resort in Gaza were test balloons. I think it's all about Venezuela and Cuba and keeping Puerto Rico. I think it's about an American extended Caribbean empire. That's what I think it is. But you have to remember that the J.D. Vance speech in Munich was historical in Europe and changed things forever. The military budgets in Europe look totally different from a year ago. That has undoubtedly happened. Poland is leading. Central Europe is leading because they're the least naive Europeans. The Germans have to pick up gradually because if Poland is getting the biggest army in Europe, then Germany has to get a big army. We're all better off because of it. So the discussions I'm having here in Europe at the moment are more in line with France cannot be the nuclear umbrella for the European Union. That's ridiculous. The French are running a bigger budget deficit, by the way, than even the Americans at the moment. Sooner or later, we have to accept that Germany and Poland have to go into some kind of alliance and have nuclear weapons to protect us against the Russians. I'm preparing the Scandinavians that we will actually love this, because the Swedes and the Finns will just say, as long as the Germans and the Poles can write peace for 1,000 years and agree on the border between the two countries, we're perfectly willing to be part of a nuclear umbrella, which is based by Germany and Poland. And the Hanseatic League and these things are going to come back historically. I think this was the best thing that could have happened to Europe. So I'm putting an end here with you in 2025 for an age that existed for 80 years politically that I call the bubblegum age. And I call it the bubblegum age because the one striking thing with American soldiers who saved Europe from Hitler when they came over in 1945 and got laid like crazy by European women. They did. They were the sexiest men they've ever seen. These American soldiers, young soldiers, they were chewing bubblegum. Europeans have never seen it before. So the bubblegum age, which infantilized Europe, allowed Europe to go into the socialist mode of big governments, high taxes, welfare state protection, and a few world-beating export companies that sort of got aligned with American companies. And whereas the Americans kept experimenting with their capitalism, the Europeans kept it more on a safe level. But on the other hand, we didn't have the poverty problems. We didn't have those problems to address that America was struggling with. We didn't have the homeless people in the streets. And that's a very cost-efficient way of running a society, not having homeless people around, because they're costly, right? So the welfare state worked until now. Here came the problem. The internet arrived. All the 7 Western AI clouds are American. Well, they're global. They can move if they want to, and to a certain extent, they're now based in Ireland. But we all know they can move. But basically, they're American, and the people who work for them are mostly Americans or have moved to America. And Silicon Valley has taken over the world. That's just the way it is. Europe is lagging behind. Europe is becoming boring. Europe is becoming too safe, too effeminate. And suddenly, Russia are actually still gaining ground in the Ukraine. That terrifies me as a European man. But I also know it's the only wake-up call we can have. So I actively, as a philosopher, I work for the Swedish defense industry today. I work with the Swedish police. I work with any of these classic sort of phallic institutions where young men have to be pulled in and start working to protect their country, get this shit in order. And I give you some good news here. 2025, the number of immigrants crossing the Mediterranean coming to Europe from Africa and the Middle East has just shrunk to a fifth of it was a year ago. That is good news. That Giorgia Meloni's success, she's really popular in Italy. But things are happening in Europe, and there is an awakening going on among European men. I'm not saying we're on a par with America or even a par with Asia and other parts of the world, but at least it's getting better compared to 3 years ago. But again, it's two big kicks in the ass. The one was J.D. Vance and the Trump doctrine, but the big kick in the ass is Putin. And in a way, he's terrible. Of course he's terrible. He's nasty. He's a dictator and all that. He's a shit asshole, whatever, but at least he's smart enough to actually have kickstarted Europe. And having the Russians around here by the Baltic Sea, the 8 Baltic and Nordic countries are more unified than ever. We have constant conversations between each other, Nordic Baltic countries. We're closely aligned now with the Poles and with the Germans, and we all agreed never become dependent on a dictator like Putin ever again, and get the fucking shit together in Europe, right? So things are gradually moving in the right direction.
My kids ask me what I do for work, and I say, I write, talk into a microphone, and hope people send money. Now I'm questioning my life choices, but the kids gotta eat, and we have bureaucracies to topple. Support our work at underthrow.org, and for less than $5 a month, you'll help me rouse the rabble. Wait, what's underthrow? If overthrow is violent, underthrow is peaceful yet powerful. Real change doesn't start in Washington. Casting your vote with millions is like crying a teardrop into the ocean. Instead, we build consent-based communities that make traditional power structures obsolete. Left, right, or center, it doesn't matter. What matters is creating options for opting out and opting in. We build parallel systems in which people thrive, then just leave the old systems behind. It's about choosing communities, not imposing them. So, support the show, feed my kids, read the newsletter, and discover why most subversive acts amount to building a better civilization together. Visit underthrow.org.
So this strikes me as a good on the masculinization front. The healthy masculine reemerges in Europe. You start to pull up your big boy pants and you stare down Russia like, bring it on. You know, like,
yep.
We got the Finns. The Finns are badasses. We've got the Polish and the Germans. The Germans are going to now become not so emasculated as they were after the war, of course. And these nation states stand on their own 2 feet. So there's a little bit of decentralization that happens because of this. Why doesn't the EU become the conductor of this symphony, or better, why is this not NATO or something?
Because the EU, the way it's designed, it's too slow.
Yeah.
And in a way that's great, because the Europeans do not believe in the European Union. The European Union is a peace product. It really is a peace product. We were terrified of Germany and France going to war again. They've already fought 2 world wars enough, right? We're terrified of the Germans and the Poles going to war again.
Yeah.
Right now, we're terrified of the Poles and the Russians going to war again, even if we will take side with the Poles. Totally. If the
I guess you'd call them the populist party in Germany. It's going right out of my mind.
The AfD.
Yeah, AfD.
Alternative for Deutschland.
Alternative für Deutschland. Yeah. The AfD prevails, and they're doing everything they can to prevent that. The old guard is. But if they prevail, do you see that being a plausible alliance with the likes of Poland and some of the Eastern European countries? It depends on
what they develop too. Okay, so I know Owen Cox theory is a friend of ours. I know Owen Cox theory because he's sitting in Britain right now seeing what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting theory that Cox and I have. We can call it the Bard Cox prophecy for Britain. And that is the surprising thing that Nigel Farage is probably going towards a landslide victory the next time around because people are sick of both Labour and Tories, right? The next opposition to Farage, dialectically, will be to the right of him, which is not what people expect when they think left-right. But in a sense, the left is dead. because nationalism is back in fashion. And this is what I meant with the EU. The EU is not a nationalist product. It's sort of a very limp kind of imperial product, but it's more a collaboration thing. And that's what we don't want to give the EU too much resources. So we keep NATO for now because we don't want the European defense yet. But there needs to be an alliance to fight for Ukraine against the Russians. And if we can win that war, and Ukraine can then be part of the European community, Ukraine will probably be one of the most exciting places in the world. I know so many Ukrainians, and you know, we're importing Ukrainian engineers to build drones now for the Swedish army, although they should be based on the front line in Ukraine building their drones. But of course, every second drone they make, they put in their own army. Every second drone they make, they put in the Swedish army. And of course, the Ukrainian engineers are superior to the Swedish ones. This is happening in Sweden, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in Poland. So Ukrainians are great. So we want them in the European community, and we don't want the European Union to be too strong, the way in America you don't want the federal government to be too strong. Most Americans prefer their states to be stronger so they have a sense of a local community. You want Florida, Texas, California to be strong, and people in Texas don't want Californians to rule over them, and people in California obviously don't want Texas to rule over them. Well, I tell you what, Europe is exactly the same way, but more of that because we have nations and we have our own languages. I do not want Italians to run Sweden. I want Swedes to run Sweden. Then I want to hold them responsible. I want the right Swedes to run Sweden. I'm a nationalist. I'm a liberal nationalist. So I think AfD in Germany is not the end of the story. I find it interesting to think that the next opposition against the current sort of bitter national conservatives we got are a much more liberal-minded form of nationalist. And we see it already in Italy. Giorgia Meloni is not the Lega Nord. That's why she's popular and why her policies work. She's great. We see the same thing in Hungary. Suddenly, Viktor Orban has a problem. He has an opposition, a guy called Peter Magyar. You know where Peter Magyar comes from? He comes from Viktor Orban's own youth organization, but made a rebellion against Daddy. Why? Because he's more liberal-minded than Viktor Orban, and he's just as much a nationalist. And I think this form of Libnat, I've got great hopes for that in Europe because I think the Libnat movement is next. And it's going to be a dialectical response against the sort of more bitter national conservatives that dominate the agenda at the moment. So, yeah, it's going to be extreme right versus extreme right. I don't mind that at all. I'm a nationalist. So I think this explains why we want to keep the European Union weaker, because if we make it too powerful, we don't want the empire. You got an empire in America. Your problem is going to be your empire.
Yeah.
America... Trump wants to be a nationalist. I'm sorry. Americans are not nationalist. Americans are imperial. You live within an empire. The nationalism you could foster in America is at church or on a state level. But until I see an American state that says we've had enough of the United States, we're leaving, we're going independent, until I see a Brexit happening in America, I do not believe that America is a nation or even understands nationalism. I think America fundamentally is an empire. And that is both an enormous asset, if you want to be powerful, but also deeply problematic. China is another empire. India is an empire. But don't ever think the European Union is going to turn Europe into an empire, because people just don't want that.
You're looking more on the ground at this existing, almost perennial bubbling up of nationality and culture that has always existed in Europe. You're never going to get rid of it. It's so much more powerful than the United States, which makes American imperialism so much more possible. But with Europe, I think you're right. There's this always been this fracturing underneath the multilateral institutions. But they're going in a they are rapidly trying to sinoform themselves, to be more like China in terms of social credit system, in terms of censorship, you know, in terms of digital IDs and so on. Do you think that this tectonic plates of diverse European cultures kind of moving fast now and becoming more nationalist, populist, and to some degree now liberal, as you put it, which means freedom maximizing, not liberal as in the United States, quasi-socialist. It's liberal as in freedom enhancing. Do you see this liberal nationalism being a force of decentralization despite all of this attempt to be China light from the top down?
Yes, I do. I do. I think specifically the nationalists who are skeptical of the European Union are also the ones that tend to defend freedom and liberty the most. Even the Sweden Democrats, which is like a very AFD-like party in Sweden, they're sort of extreme right. But the thing with the Sweden Democrats is that they decided this last year, oh, it's a good political position for us to take to fight the European Union on the level of personal integrity. I don't think personal integrity is grounded in their ideology, whatever that ideology is. But they just realize it's a smart move because we, as populists, people want their freedom and their liberty, especially if they're Swedish. So, and in Germany, I'll tell you one thing, they had the Nazis. They've been reminded of Nazism. My problem with German men right now, working with them a lot in the men's movement in Europe, is that they're still too much on the guilt trip. And it's a bit like being a German man is a bit like being part of the patriarchy, being accused by radical feminists of being evil because you're part of the patriarchy. It's like there's something wrong with you because you're a man, right? Being a German man is specifically that means that you're guilty of something you don't even know about any longer that happened a long time ago that you're not part of. You're still guilty of it,
Oh,
right?
I know. I'm
Because you're German.
Southern.
Yeah, that's
Southern
what I'm
American.
saying. I love the fact that the Trump doctrine is removing the guilt from Germany and Japan and said, okay, you were the losers in 1945 and you were horrible regimes run by fucking fascist dictators. We're over it now. It's been 80 years. Japan is no longer the same thing. Germany no longer the same thing. And rather, today, Japan and Germany are the very two countries that are most on the side with you and me. The center for decentralization in Europe today is Germany. Precisely because they're immunized due to Nazism. The ones I trust the most when it comes to fighting this kind of legislation in the European Union and opening up the European Union and European countries and let them decide for themselves and decentralize the continent as much as possible, my allies are German today. So in this sense, Germany being as strong as it is in the Union is kind of an immunization against the Union going too far towards a police state. But whenever anarchy pops up, politicians react by trying to play tough and going tough on crime. And tough on crime,
Yeah.
the key word for that is child pornography. There's that ghost called these ghosts, patriarchy, child pornography. They throw out these ghosts like child pornography is an evil and we have to get rid of child pornography. No, we have to get rid of abuse against children. Pictures aren't necessarily abusive, right? Really just pictures. So it's not something we're going to give up all our other freedoms and our entire liberty for to fight child pornography in a way that can't be fought anyway. It just doesn't make any sense. But they use those excuses because they will be the top of the heap if that police state is introduced. And sometimes they come from Sweden, and we call the Germans and say, can you stop this fucking Swede in the parliament in Brussels from speaking tomorrow because we need to stop these guys, because we need to go again for the decentralization. But I give an example when this works well. I had a lecture today with some Swedish police officers, and we're actively working together on trying to solve the problem with cultural integration of immigrant kids. So we get them out of criminal gangs and make them have possible civilized lives and families and raise kids and have work and go to regular jobs and pay taxes, to be citizens, right? So we're having these discussions, and there was a question about me that came up during the session. And the question was, we all know you're doing psychedelics, Alexander. You're quite public about it. Yeah, but I follow the law. How do you follow the law if it's criminal here in Sweden? I don't do it here. I do it in another European country. You want to do a ball game with me? We fly to Estonia or the Czech Republic. You want to do mushrooms with me? We fly to the Netherlands. You want to do ayahuasca with me? We could do the ceremony in Portugal or Denmark. So all I do is I have this map of some 30-plus countries called Europe. And if I want to do something here, I just go to the country where I can do it. If I want to live somewhere here, I just pick the country where I can be the most free or probably pay less taxes than somewhere else. So the great thing about nationalism today in the global world is that you can move and learn the language in a country, become a citizen where you would love to live. You can migrate. And this is the great thing about nationalism. Nationalism with open borders is the perfect recipe for you and me to go towards the freedom and liberty we're dying to have. And this is why in America, anti-federalism has to return, because the only way you can fight the empire called Washington, D.C., or Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley. You want to fight that empire and those two power centers. The only way you can do it is on the state level right now in America.
Well, and that is for me a glimmer of hope to what could be restored in the United States in terms of some sort of state level sovereignty. But let me gosh, I really wanted to go to one of your favorite places, but I want to linger for just one moment on something you said. And that is that if you have an open border policy among the nation states of Europe, but that is different, say. So that reminds me of the condition of right after, I guess, the European community was developed, but before the EU, where you had pretty much a free trade bloc and people could move to and fro among the different countries fairly easily. But what you don't want, I assume, is a membrane that is completely porous and unchecked immigration from other places. Or am I wrong about that? Do you want to see
No, no,
completely open borders?
that we've already been through that, and I think it's a point of no return in European politics. So anybody could be portrayed as opening the borders today and let anybody in is out of office next election. So most green parties are suffering right now in Europe. We don't matter. Even for people who find environment and climate important, and it's been a huge issue in Europe, it's also because we've gone secular, we have to find these sort of religious fanatical issues that Europeans are excited about. So a lot of the madness that comes out of Europe is basically just secular people who miss their religion. So to excuse them, it's a bit like baptism and shit like that. So Greta Thunberg is fundamentally very Protestant, right? So the problem has been that people have jumped onto these topics, but even the environmentalists are tired of the Green parties because the Green parties have also bought into the woke ideology of open borders. And I can tell you what, there's no way anybody promoting open, porous borders to the outside world outside of Europe today can get elected in Europe. We're already past that point. The social democratic parties of Denmark and Sweden are fiercely anti-immigration now, because it's the only way they can win votes and win elections.
And this also
and they realize
corresponds with
that,
the
and because they want to keep power, they completely embrace that. So I'm not scared of that. I'm not scared of going back to that. Well, technologies could be developed that could make people force themselves through borders. It's true, but right now as things are, the smartphone migration peak was in 2015. Most migrants in Europe today are Ukrainians, and they adapt very well, especially because most of them are women marrying local men.
right.
So that's not a problem at all. The Ukrainians are not a problem for anybody really in Europe, and they also work hard, and they also know that having a few Ukrainians abroad, sending money home, taking care of their families at home through remittances is a way to keep Ukraine going in the war. So right now in Europe, I think the big flood, uncontrolled flood of Africans and Arabs has basically stopped in its tracks. And what we want a controlled migration of Africans and Arabs to come to Europe and have work to do and work hard and then raise families and kids in Europe. And that's fine. But it has to be controlled. And the experience after the 2010s was that was a disaster, especially in Germany and Sweden. And since we now remember that disaster,
And Britain, for
those
sure.
very people who promote such ideas cannot go reelected.
Yeah.
So we're at least beyond that point.
Okay. Now we can move on to something that is one of my favorite things about your influence on me, but it took some slapping me around to get me to this point. Okay. And this is true of Americans who are skeptical of this. And that is Hegelian dialectics. You have made some reference to that in this conversation, and I'm comfortable with that now, where at first I might not have been when we first met. So if you would be so kind, how do you penetrate that skepticism, especially for the Anglo-American mind, with an explanation, a simple, relatively simple explanation of dialectics? How do you do that initially? And can you do it with me here today to some degree?
Okay. I think
Opening the
bad
door.
policy is always the compromise. The compromise is a bad idea because the compromise is usually the compromise between the loudest guy in the room and the weakest guy in the room, and the loudest guy wins. So compromises may look like, okay, we're gonna go halfway between these two poles.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that one of the poles will invest more energy, go more energetic, more aggressive, and therefore the point will shift in that direction to avoid conflict. So I think conflict avoidance, often masquerading as pacifism or masquerading as being peaceful or civilized, is rotten. It's rotten to the core. I'm an enemy of conflict avoidance, because I think most people who think of themselves being peaceful and civilized are really passive aggressive. I think Kamala Harris, and I really detest her, I think Kamala is one of the most passive aggressive people I've ever seen. I think it's absolutely obvious in any interview she gives, she's passive aggressive. She's even throwing Joe Biden under the bus at the moment, preparing for another candidacy. If the Democrats pick somebody like her, they're doomed to lose in 2028 because people realize she's passive aggressive, and it's incredibly unsexy, very unhealthy, bad thing, right? So the compromise is what you try to avoid. What Hegel figured out was that you gotta let the entire dialectical process go the way through to its very end point. That means that if there's a conflict, you gotta go through the entire debate all the way to the very end. And you've got to accept the solution is probably very close to one of the two positions, because that position is superior. So I give an example of how I describe this. For example, I get questions all the time about my opinions on things. And most of the time these days, when somebody comes to the door and says, when should the kids have a smartphone? Well, according to psychologists and looking at data feeds, it looks like they shouldn't have smartphones before they're 16 years of age. But I don't have an opinion on that. Why? Because this debate is raging among parents in Sweden and America today. That's all they talk about. And they say that, well, we got to give a smartphone to the kids in third grade. We know it's not healthy for them to have them when they're 9 years old. And I asked them, well, why don't you wait till they're 16? Because they get bullied at school by the other kids who have smartphones if you don't give it to them. So even if they get brain damage because of it, have their brains fucking fried, I have to give a smartphone to the kid. Well, that's not the end. That's not the end. Fight the other kids and the parents and keep at least the kids away from smartphone until they're 10. Because you know they should be 16. And in Silicon Valley, they are 16 when they get their first fucking smartphone. Because Elon Musk knows kids shouldn't have smartphones before they're 16. Because you turn them into brain-fried addicts if you give them smartphones earlier than that. Now, if that genie's out of the bottle, I gladly, as a Hegelian, leave it to people to debate it. I think the parents love their children, and I completely trust that parents are much more aligned with their kids than I could ever be. And my opinion is the least interesting opinion out there because that debate's already raging. But if that debate is not there, then it's my job as a dialectical philosopher to enlighten people that they should have that debate. Now, for example, I'm much more aligned with the question that we have this flood of 19-year-old girls who storm into psychiatric care units in Sweden and America at the moment. And the first analysis people give them is that they're Instagram addicts because they're on Instagram 10 hours a day. Now, that might not be the end of the dialectical process. What I've discovered is that, since I'm allergic to the police state, what I discovered is that mothers of teenagers have learned they could put apps into their daughter's smartphones. So they can track where the smartphones are at any given time because their daughter must be the good little girl and the little princess that the mother fantasizes about and not be a bad girl who's out too late seeing the wrong guys. So girls today cannot make the teenage rebellion they should have as girls so they can become women. They're completely infantilized by their own mothers. So, it's good intentions all the way to hell. So if you look through the entire dialectical process, you discover, no, the problem is that the women have become police state tyrants over the very daughters they're supposed to love. Then we have to address it, and then I write a text. Then I become a philosopher. I talk about in a conversation with you to make people enlightened enough to understand that we cannot have the police state, especially not inside the family, the most sacred thing we know. And until mothers have that debate, when the mothers and the daughters start fighting each other, having that discussion, I'm out. This is dialectics. This is dialectics is understanding that you have to go through. And the way to do dialectic is start with the negation. Hegel understood brilliantly that start with what's not there. Don't preoccupy yourself with what's there and argue too much about it. Rather look at China and discover, oh my God, China's social credit systems and they're running towards a communist party dictatorship with cameras and microphones everywhere and all the data collected so they can control you and basically your life will be horrible. It's total Orwell, right? That's a negation. We don't have that, but we also don't want that. Now, what do we want then? What is the negation of the negation? What could possibly be the alternative? We have to start imagining what kind of America and what kind of Europe could we have? And in what ways is it great that America and Europe stay different from each other? But how can we avoid Europe or America becoming China? And how can we liberate China and help the Chinese people who fight the Communist Party to get rid of it? Those are dialectical processes. This is the easiest way to describe what dialectics is.
Fantastic.
It's not a compromise. It's never a compromise.
Yeah, or even a fusion where you just pick and choose little attributes from each side and gingerly put them together. It really is much more the conflictual. The important thing that I learned that you taught me is to look for the negation before the sublation, and that really helped me start to think along these lines. I'm still a baby for sure, but it's become it flows much more readily now in my thinking, and I hope our
So
listeners will too.
you could just think about how your own phenomenology operates, how you actually perceive the world before there's even a sense of Max or Alexander in any experience we have. The sort of pure first innocent experience you have of anything. We realize that our brain is looking for anything ambivalent out there because ambivalent is risk, and that means there could be a threat of some kind around the corner. And we're animals, and we have enemies out there, natural enemies, and we should understand we do. But what's interesting with that is that once the ambivalence is there, oh, something just, I don't need to be reminded the sky is blue. But if the sky is suddenly purple, then certainly that's different from blue. And the sky's not supposed to be purple. What happened? Why do we have a purple sky? Ambivalence, right? When you start enjoying the ambivalences that your mind registers from the outside world, then you really get what we're going for. Because ambivalence is the opening to a whole new imagination. The beauty of life is that life could be different from what it is. Novelty is fantastic. Creativity is fantastic. But the novelty and creativity start precisely with that negation. Like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. But instead of reacting like, this is not the way it's supposed to be, therefore I have to stop it so it is what it's supposed to be. That's how most people react. If you can stay with the attitude that, oh, that was odd. How interesting. If you can stay with that attitude, you become so much more creative with just about everything you're dealing with, including how you deal with the human beings. Oh, that was odd. That person was a bit weird. That was a bit strange, but how interesting. It could be something I could get inspired by to transform myself into something I'm not. That's dialectics.
The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The gray robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes.org.
Having known you for some time now, I've become more persuaded that philosophy and religion are not only conjoined twins, but that dialectics is mixed up in that these are essential to our well-being. So I've been thinking lately about how you even said yourself in Sweden, there's this rash of young people who are going to therapy all the time. I was talking with my wife the other day, and I said something to the effect, I'm becoming more persuaded that philosophy and religion are much better for our well-being than therapy and politics. And she certainly thought that politics resonated for her, that was unhealthy, basically, that the more you engage in that, the more you think about it, the less fulfilling it is and the less spiritually nourishing it is. But she didn't quite get the therapy thing. We could talk about that another time. But I think you agree that religion and philosophy are not only conjoined twins, but important to well-being. But it seems like, especially in the United States, I think you would agree, that what we get, if we get it at all, are like pablum versions of it. Sort of really attenuated versions of philosophy and religion that are not just that they don't just fail to be spiritually nourishing. They're almost like a commodity, or they're almost, they're sold in a bottle as a tonic. What do we do about that?
I think that will all fail. And the three reasons I'm talking about the return of religion and spirituality. The first thing is that now with AI taking over, for example, the therapy industry, and for standard therapy, AI is better than humans. It's also very tolerant of you. You can talk to it for hours and it doesn't get tired of you. Just give it electricity and it goes on. And if you want to endless therapy sessions, AI will do it better than humans will. It will. It does already for most people. So that's one reason that with AI coming, which is basically the internet with a layer of intelligence added to it, no consciousness, just intelligence, and that's all we need. With that much intelligence being thrown at us in a way we never used to before, and with imitating humans in so many ways and looking so human-like to most people, there's only theology. It's the only place we have to go to try to understand it. We call it sin theology because it's a theology about machines. And so God is a word we put in the future rather than the past. We don't need God in the past any longer. We could put God in the future. But the idea that technology is developing in a way where it becomes incomprehensible to us, but it works. It's the way we always dealt with theology. We always describe things as theological when they work for us, but we don't understand why. Mysteries and shit like that were theological. So there's a reason for it returning. The other reason is simple community. We experimented with secular, especially in Europe during the bubblegum age after 1945, experimented with secularity. Even Poland. Poland used to be the most Catholic country in the world. 90% of Poles went to church 30 years ago. These days, only 40% of Poles go to church on a regular basis. Among people under 25, it's 2% who go to church. Catholicism is dying in Poland rapidly. It's dying in Ireland rapidly. So Europe is now moving into secular mode. I hope the Middle East does the same thing with Islam and goes secular. But after the secular mode, which is dialectical, there comes a return to religion because we lost the most important thing the religion provided, which was community. I love churches. I love mosques. I love synagogues. And not having them, like in Sweden right now, where only Muslims have the mosques left, is terrible for people. So you got to go back to community and you have to return to religion. And my advice is then don't go back to the religion you lost because it probably was incredible. I don't believe noble lies work any longer. I think you have, myself, I'm a Zoroastrian noble religions because I can believe in it. So pick one you can believe in, attach yourself to tradition, and you get a community. So that's the second reason. So we have those two reasons. The third reason is what comes after capitalism due to digital. Is at least for the people who can afford to say so, the people who live smart lives or make tons of money so they have fuck off money in their bank account. Fuck off money means that I have enough money in my bank account so I can no to things that I want to do. I don't want to do. I will only say yes to things I want to do. I don't want to say yes to things I don't want to do. Okay? If that is the case, that means capitalism is complete. What I love about Bitcoin is not that it's new. It's the completion of capitalism. It's the completion of currency. It's the perfect currency. Capitalism is done. And capitalism grabs you and me by the collar and asks us, is there anything in your life which is not for sale? And if you can't answer that question, say, no, everything in my life is for sale, you're a whore. That's what capitalism does. Capitalism asks you, are you a whore or not? Or is there anything that you're not a whore about? Because I can whore. I don't mind whoring. It's called paid work. And I get paid to do things that I don't want to do. But I get paid to do them. I get money. And I can use the rest of my time to do what I want to do and spend that money because I have enough money to say no. In this sense, money is nothing but a resource to be able to say no and keep your liberty and keep your freedom. That's a great thing with money. Now, that means for most people today, the most important question is no longer economical. We have a new term for this that we're working with at the moment in my team. We call it chronomical. Chronomic. That means the chronomical question is, what am I going to do in my life until the day I die? What does my life calendar look like? What are my priorities? What do I want to do with my life? Who do I want to hang out with? Where do I want to travel? What do I want to do? Can I get the means, work, so I can do what I want to do the rest of my life? Now, most people reason like this already, and I find it incredibly healthy and incredibly wonderful. It's kind of a communist utopia if you think about it. People actually are saying, no, I will not compromise with my time. I will only do the things that I love to do. Max and Alexander will only talk to each other and record a podcast if they're interested in having a conversation, and then having further conversations with third and fourth people listening to this podcast. That's how we do it. So I live a chronomical life, and I advise people to live a chronomical life if they can. And I said the economical part of your life is only getting the means to be more chronomical. And if you're really successful and you did work hard and it paid off and you got the money in the bank account, your capital is growing, thank God, you got the fuck off money secured, then you can spend your entire life doing nothing but chronomics. I think chronomics is the future. We called it attentionalism 25 years ago. It's a kind of a confusing term. Attention is used both in AI development today. It's used also in relationship with human beings. We say that we replace capitalism with an attentionalist society because it's all about where we put our eyes, where we put our ears, what we give priority to. And as long as you and I can decide what we're going to give our attention to, we're in control of this society. And once the cameras and the microphones try to manipulate us, we've lost the attentionalist race, and then the machines have taken over, and whoever is behind the machine controls us. We don't want that to happen. That's why we go for decentralization, we go for control over data flows, and we go for the fact that I want to control my world and my time and my senses. That is how I feel that I become my true self today. I become my chronomic self. I become the person who's in charge of my own calendar. And don't you fuck with my time, because space has disappeared. Digital has killed space. I can talk to you. You're sitting in South Carolina. I'm sitting in Sweden right now. We're talking to each other like we're in the same room at zero cost. That means space has disappeared. What is left is time. And everything we value as human beings is the fact that we're going to die one day. We're going to postpone it, but we're going to die one day. We want to live long lives, quality lives, but it's all about the quality of that life. That's the real value today that we all can agree on. And that kind of chronomic self and that kind of chronomic life is what I'm putting.
Strikes me that two big influences on you. One is the Nietzschean influence, where Nietzsche's demon would have asked you, what do you want to do with every moment, assuming you had to live it over and over again. And I think this is a way of framing this in a bit for attentionalism, or what did you call it again?
Attention, chronomics.
Chronomics,
So
yeah.
it's not economics, it's chrono
Right.
for time and nomics. So
Yes,
like
what do I want to do with my time?
How you organize your time. That's what it means.
Yeah.
It's a perfect Latin word. So chronomics, yeah.
And it also, of course, reminds me of
it's actually a Greek. Sorry, it's a
your
Greek word. I correct myself.
Zoroastrianism.
I have to correct myself. It's a Greek word. Chronomics is a Greek word. So
Yeah, from chronos, yeah, time. There's two different words for time in Greek: chronos and is it
kairos?
Kairos, yeah. But the other, and then there's Zervan, which reminds me of your Zoroastrianism and of course Zarathustra of Nietzsche. That leads me to want to ask you, and I don't think I've ever asked you this: how did a Swede of, what is it, South African extract come to be a Zoroastrian?
I started this spirituality because I realized in the 1980s when I was young, and I realized I would become a philosopher one day, I realized it would be embarrassing to start with the Greeks again, because nothing started with the Greeks. That's just European myth. Lord Byron in the 1820s went to Greece to fight the Ottomans. And that created the idea of a Christian civilization called Europe, fighting, of course, a Muslim civilization called Turkey or whatever. It's a myth. It was a story Lord Byron made up in the 1820s. It never existed before Lord Byron made it up. There's never been a European continent before that. When Columbus went to the Americas, he was basically going to Americas to compensate for the fact that Europe had lost Byzance to the Muslims. And because Byzance had been lost, you got to find some other place to go to plunder for gold or whatever. And they came to the Americas, and eventually we colonized it, and Europe became the center of attention, although the Turks kept Istanbul. But it was my search through spirituality, and I was studying Buddhism and Taoism. It comes quite naturally because You have all kinds of religious traditions in the East, but Buddhism and Taoism really are philosophical schools rather than religions. We often say that, yeah, Buddhism is kind of atheism. It's kind of more philosophical, even if it's a religion or religious practice. So it's just that we're uncomfortable with these things because the Easterners never made these divisions. There's never been a division between philosophy and religion at all. That was only made up in the academic world in Europe in the 1600s so that the new philosophers that came along wouldn't go over to the theology departments and kill them. So the theology departments could keep their shit to themselves and run the church, and the philosophy departments could run everything else. That's why philosophy and theology were separated in the West. Never happened in Asia. It doesn't make any sense to an Indian or a Chinese person at all. So I realized this. I was close to converting to Taoism in the early 1990s. Then I realized that there's the third tradition we missed out on, and that's the Persian tradition, because we have wrongly assumed that the Persian tradition is Western because it's Islam. But Islam is a late arrival in Persia, and Persia is actually the perfect bridge between East and West. And original Persian culture, many people before, like Hegel, Nietzsche, Spengler, all these guys have written a lot about Persian culture. They're huge fans of Persian culture because Persian culture is the third major culture coming out of what we call Asia. And Zoroastrianism was reformed Hinduism. So Zoroastrianism and Buddhism are like two sister religions that have influenced each other enormously. Even Sufism is originally coming out of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, not Islam. It just attached itself to an Islamic umbrella later, just basically to keep the Sufis alive and not have them killed by Muslims. So what I found was that there are three different traditions that I must study, and I learned Sanskrit, and I learned Avesta, and I learned some decent Mandarin as well, so I could study the original scriptures and study Taoism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism properly, because these are the three philosophical traditions of the East. Then I discovered that Zen Buddhism in Japan had strong Persian influences. That was controversial when I wrote those papers in the 1990s. Now everybody knows that's a fact. The Persians influenced the Japanese influenced the Persians by trading through China for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this made sense because I realized when I went to Zen monasteries in Japan that a lot of the things I saw around me were identical to what I'd seen before in Yazd in Iran. Asians traded with each other for thousands of years, called the Silk Road. Most philosophies in the East are Silk Road philosophies. They traveled along the trade routes. So you took an idea with you on some goods with you and you went trading. And I love trade and I love philosophy of trade because I think trade is the best immunization against war we could possibly have. So the Silk Road impressed me, and I was this close to becoming a Taoist when I was offered by the Persian community to convert to Zoroastrianism instead, because in the 1990s they just opened up to the first Western converts. Now there are thousands of Westerners who converted to Zoroastrianism. It's kind of this next thing to come after Buddhism to discover Zoroastrianism. But I recommend all the guys who follow me to study these three amazing religions of the East because they're schools of philosophy. They're thousands of years old, and they have such enormous wealth and richness to them. So study them, and if you want to, why don't you pick one of them and convert? So that's why I became a Zoroastrian in the 1990s.
Fabulous. I've another conversation for another day about my own path of late. But it strikes me one time, I remember you're saying something to the effect of, and it's related to this business about Persia, that most people consider Western philosophy as originating in Jerusalem and in Athens. And you say, not so fast. And I guess it would be Persepolis or it'd be Persia, right? Would be the third. And I think you can make the argument that you wouldn't want to get rid of Athens in this, but instead form a triad of influences.
I would even argue that the West is built on the Persian-Hebrew axis. And Greek culture follows from that, and Roman culture falls further from that. Because the Greeks copied the ideas of the Persians, and the Romans copied the behaviors of the Persians. The Mithraic orders, all the way up to Freemasonry, all these things have Persian origins, right?
Yeah.
It's obvious if you spend some time with intellectuals in the Arab world and in Iran. It's very, very obvious. It's older. The culture is much older.
Mm-hmm.
And what's great about this Persian Hebrew axis is that it also connects Persian culture to the East through India. Also through China later, but especially through India. So the connection of India and Persia being Indo-European cultures for us today to explore European identity is that what's great with that is that the Persian part is actually Indo-European. The reformed paganism that Zoroastrianism has been for 3,700 years is what I promote in Scandinavia today. I don't see a return to Christianity, but I see a return to reformed paganism, and it has a name. It's called nationalism. Nationalism in Europe was never Christian. Oh, Christianity was always about empire, Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, European Union, all those ideas are Christian. No, the real pagan idea in Europe is you stay with your linguistic group, the people you can trust, and you create a community with them, and it's called nationalism. Nationalism is the pagan religion of Europe. That's why I think nationalism is coming back so strongly and is deeply, deeply pagan, but it's reformed paganism. And I like that. I think that's a good place to go right now to find nourishment and find inspiration. And at least for Europe, I hope it's going to work. It's the only game in town for the Europeans now.
Do you think
To go
that
full nationalism.
the literal violence between, say, two empires like the Greeks and the Persians, or between Alexander and the dying remains of the Persian Empire, that literal kinetic physical fighting was also a dialectic of sorts?
Well, they didn't fight that much. They mostly traded with each other. The Greeks fought each other.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Most of the time, Greeks and Persians traded. And a lot of the Greek philosophers were Persian. Heraclitus was obviously Persian. He was probably Kurdish. Pythagoras, half of them have Persian origins, or they came from Syria or somewhere else. They were Persian provinces. Heraclitus even said, I don't understand why Greece would stay independent. To be part of the Persian Empire is an honor. Those are the words of Heraclitus, right? So, and Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great, and basically told Alexander the Great, who was the king of a small kingdom called Macedonia, and he told him, well, if you invade the Persians right now, the Persians are fighting each other, so you can just invade Persia and take it over. Just do like the Persians do when you do that. So Alexander the Great invaded Persia, and he burned down Persepolis, as he should.
And he acted like
and then
Cyrus.
he turned the Persian Empire into a Persian Empire with a Greek at the top.
Yeah.
And eventually, of course, this golden age of Hellenism was this mixture of Greek, Hebrew, Phoenician, Persian,
and you get all
Indian,
the wonderful syncretic.
all these things merged in the Hellenist period into one of the richest cultural periods of human history.
Yeah. You get, and then you get all the fun, like Hermeticism that comes afterwards, and
yeah.
And
the reason I don't include Egypt in this analysis is not that Egypt wasn't incredibly influential. It's just that the Egyptian heritage is so weak. We talk about Western philosophy today. I can trace just about everything that we discuss as being serious, like empiricism or pragmaticism or Nietzsche or Hegel or whatever, dialectics. I can trace it all back to the Persians, almost all of it. The Egyptians never fully developed anything like that. They were much more into the polytheism and into different explanational models that were bordering much more on the mythical. And if the Egyptians inspired the Greeks to anything that I would give the Greeks credit for, it was the invention of drama. But drama starts with the Greeks. Theater starts with the Greeks. We don't know theater, like a concentrated effort towards an art called theater, before the Greeks do it. And that could have been inspired by the Egyptians for sure. But not philosophy. Philosophy comes from the Persian Hebrew axis. And the Persians invented empire, and the Hebrews invented the nation state. They invented the nation. They even turned it into their own religion. So the Phoenicians and the Hebrews are one part of the axis, and the other part of the axis is Persian. And you'll discover in Greek history that it either has Persian or Phoenician origins. Just about everything you study with the Greeks.
Really, really interesting. Okay. We only have about 10 minutes left. So let me not fail to ask you about something that is more of an evolutionary construct, okay? And that is archetypology and archetypes. One of the things that you've really opened my eyes to is seeing the archetypes more deeply than, say, a Jung might even. Although Jung is to be credited, I think you bring the evolutionary aspect to it. That there are these deep sort of familial and tribal structures that well up in us as human beings as we play the archetypal roles within our tribal groups, so to speak. Can you talk about that in a way that will fit inside 10 minutes and
Oh yeah,
leave our
sure.
audience wanting more?
I'd say that if we're not going to have Plato, and I hate Plato, so we need an understanding of forms. And the guy who came along and gave us the perfect alternative, probably inspired by Aristotle, who was an opponent of Plato, but thought it through properly, was Darwin. We must consider Darwin, like McLuhan, for example, or Freud as a philosopher today, in hindsight. Darwin came with this idea that evolution explains just about everything. Just give it enough time, and it explains everything. That means the forms that we do live with are evolutionary. And here's the trick. We're men and women, and the different types of men and the different types of women. There's a vertical archetypology. You undoubtedly are a different man when you're 3 years old and a little boy, and when you're 13 years old, and when you're 33, and when you're 53 or 85. So depending on your age, which you call vertical archetypology, the different types of men or women. There's a horizontal archetypology. There are different types of men to court. There's like different personalities. When you start looking at people that way, and we can do that today, I'm credited with the one-liner that the social sciences never existed. There never were any social sciences. Psychology never existed. Sociology never existed. It was nothing but ideology production, the worst kind. Because all sociologists seem to love centralization too. So we hate sociology, you and I. So we can kill sociology. But finally, we
Amen.
do have a social science because the one thing we can study are data from behaviors. And that's exactly how loads off today. So we can do what we call data anthropology. And a lot of the guys following me are doing data anthropology today because it's exactly what you should do when you get the data. Now, if we do that, we discover that there are very different traces in human beings and different personalities. And what's funny is that since we're all alive, we're all winners in the evolutionary game. So it's a good story to tell people like, okay, I can assure you that you had a purpose in society 5,000 years ago. I cannot assure you still have that purpose today because the technology might have killed it, or globalization might have made you redundant, or whatever. I don't care. But I can guarantee that you can at least have the form of self-respect, that you would have a position, a contributive role in our community 5,000 years ago, because otherwise you wouldn't be around. Now, that is great because it gives us a new way of looking at difference between human beings. And this is the big enemy of woke ideology today, is archetypology. And I should also address that I don't use it the way Jung does because I think Jung popularized the idea of the archetype but went down the wrong path. I even radically say that I'm pre-Jungian. I understand archetypology the way it was understood before Jung kidnapped the word. I want to go back to pre-Jungian archetypology, and I want to have the facts on the ground. I want to know what kind of men could we be, what kind of women could we be. And what's great with this model is that you can then develop your personality type accordingly. You can find a true self in this sense. The advice I give people is to try to find 2 archetypes that they can subscribe to, and not the ones you pick. You cannot choose the archetype. This is exactly the point. It's given to you. It's your genetics. It's what you're born and cannot avoid. It can be called a curse, a destiny, a fate, but it's who you really are without choice. So other people can point you in that direction of what kind of man or what kind of woman you are so you can find your archetype. Now, if you find that there's a primary archetype, is that what you do with ease? It's the easiest thing in the world for you to do. You just do it naturally and other people are impressed. And they applaud you and say, how do you do that? Well, I don't know. I just do it. It's just me. I'm just a person who does those things. That's your primary archetype. The secondary archetype is that which you can do with effort. You can still do it. It's what you probably get your education to do. It's probably your profession. But it's something you can do. You can work with it. You can deliver on it. You can make your money from it, to buy yourself freedom from it. But the second archetype is usually your profession or something similar. But at least allow yourself to give yourself a few years to try to develop your 2 archetypes and see them pop up. And then you can follow those 2 things. And for people working with archetypology, this is incredibly liberating. And again, it's a message which is pro-decentralization. Because any given centralizing society will try to foster us all into the same fit. Archetypology is the starting point for a philosophy of decentralization. Since we are different, and since there's a point to that difference because we then contribute differently, we have the strongest possible community if you allow for that kind of difference. And that can only come through decentralization.
While acknowledging these subtle patterns and evolutionary patterns that match with our roving bands, our groups
Yeah, we were
in the
nomadic
Paleolithic
when all of
past.
this happened. This is like, you need a period of hundreds of thousands of years for evolution to kick in, and probably a very decimated population that was small a few times. It was 3 million at most. It was probably just a few thousand humans left a couple of times in history, and we were almost going extinct. And then we started expanding. Homo sapiens lasted 40,000 years. Homo sapiens was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years, and finally came along 40,000 years ago. We're all Homo sapiens now. We killed all of their hominids. That means those archetypes are formed in what we call a nomadological setting. So you have to think of yourself as being on the move, walking to survive, and helping other people to walk as well to survive. If you think of yourself as that kind of movement, then you realize that, like Oswald Spengler says, plants are permanently settled. Animals move. Human beings are not plants. We're animals. We have to move. And if we realize that we have to move, it's a movement that the evolutionary forms that were shaped come forward.
And to give folks an example who are still watching us at this point, what you and I are doing right now, or what we might have been doing by the fire, right?
Yeah,
While
absolutely.
and we may with reluctance have been dragged out onto the hunt, or to fight, to defend, but we would be the sagely types, the teachers, the shaman, the priest,
Storytellers.
the storytellers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
This, and later on the scribes, which is just a transmutation of those things that we started talking about, which are those phases from oral to written and so on, in terms of the way information is transmitted. But we would be information gatherers and synthesizers, whereas other people would use their bodies more kinetically, or even there would be difference in, we wouldn't be asked to rule, we would be asked to give advice or mediate.
We'd probably even be asked to be go-betweens. What I call shamanoid in my work. We have shamanoid characteristics in our personalities. So we're very comfortable traveling. We're comfortable speaking other languages, talking to strangers, So we were probably sent by the tribe, and they probably say, okay, you're pretty used to hunting and warfare or whatever. Although I love to shoot animals and kill them, but that's just I don't say I'm an expert at it. I just love it. But I'd say you and I also have shamanoid characteristics. So we'd probably be representing the tribe in peaceful ways in connection with other tribes.
Mm.
And once you talk to strangers, you get a monopoly and talk to the strangers, you talk to the gods and the demons too. And that's what we call the shamanoid personalities. But it's, again, all of this is just incredibly wonderful to discover when you do archetypology. And it's not a set world at all. Archetypology is open for interpretation. Absolutely.
I think that you understate what you just said a minute ago about, once you start to explore what the archetypes you're given, and not the ones you choose, the ones you're given, once you fully explore those, you can start to approach the best that evolution gives us in terms of the sublime.
Yeah.
That is one vector, one path to spirituality.
Absolutely. I think all of these things are built into good religion to begin with. So they've got to be part of the mix. Absolutely.
Well, Alexander
Max, we
Bard,
promised each other we can talk for hours. You
I
and
know.
promise each other to try to keep it maximum 90 minutes. I think we're there somewhere.
We are. But look, I hope you'll join me again very soon. I see no reason why we can't do this again fairly frequently.
Yes, I totally subscribe to that. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Big love to you and anybody who went through the 90 minutes with me, Max. Big love to you guys too.